Welcome back to Educator.com. Today we're going to discuss comparative advantage and trade. So let's dive right into the material. So in today's lesson overview, what we're going to do is we're going to identify how trade and specialization leads to gains for an individual or an economy. We're going to compare between a market economy and a command economy. We're going to differentiate between absolute and comparative advantage. And then we're going to create a comparative advantage table in order to find the lower opportunity cost. And we'll also examine finally how international trade makes both rich and poor nations even richer. So that's the lesson overview. So let's move right along here. So the basic economic concepts that's found in the College Board syllabus here is that students need to be able to differentiate between absolute and comparative advantage, to identify comparative advantage from differences in opportunity costs, and to apply the concept of comparative advantage in order to determine the basis under which mutually advantageous trade can take place between countries here. So again, if you look at this whole idea, the more important of the two advantages between absolute and comparative, notice here that comparative advantage here is used 1, 2, 3 times there, whereas absolute advantage here is only mentioned that one time here. So it's good to know what absolute advantage is, absolutely, but comparative advantage is really what the basis of mutually beneficial trade is. So trade and specialization. So the father of modern economics, and that would be Adam Smith, in Wealth of Nations, he wrote an excerpt here in 1776, which is the most famous document written in 1776, which is the Wealth of Nations. He writes about the benefits of specialization. Now this page is over 1,000 pages, so obviously this section is really just a snapshot of what Adam Smith is talking about, but it really highlights the point of why specialization is important. So one man draws out the wire, another straights it, a third cuts it, a fourth points it, a fifth grinds it at the top for receiving the head. To make the head requires 2 or 3 distinct operations. To put it on is a particular business. To whiten the pins is another. It is even a trade by itself to put them into the paper. And the important business of making a pin is, in this manner, divided into 18 distinct operations. Those 10 persons, therefore, could make among them upwards of 48,000 pins in a day. But if they had all wrought separately and independently, they certainly would not each of them have made 20, perhaps not 1 pin in a day. So what Adam Smith observed is that if an individual is adamant about making a simple thing like a pen, or a simple thing like a pin, it might not even be enough to make 20, or maybe even 1 in one particular day. But in the process of breaking down and specializing and exploiting comparative advantage, you can see that the total amount could be as much as 48,000 pins. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of break down how that actually happens. One documentary that you can watch on YouTube is that there's a 6-minute documentary that we see a modern day example of what Adam Smith wrote in Wealth of Nations. So in this documentary called iPencil, I recommend that you maybe pause this video and watch it and return, is that you see the specialization that happens in making a pencil. So each part of a pencil is made from these different countries, and no one country is really capable of making the pencil because it would just be too cost prohibitive, and the pencil takes so many different stages. So you see the beauty of a free market economy and letting individuals come to the marketplace, and you see the beauty of the free market and the invisible hand of Adam Smith coming together in making a pencil. And so what is this market economy? So in a market economy, production and consumption decisions are the result of decentralized decisions made by individuals and firms. So whether you buy a pencil, whether you purchase a textbook, whether you buy a movie or DVD, these are decisions that are made individually by people, not forced upon by government. And for the most part, we have a free market economy in a lot of countries. There's not a lot of government interference in a lot of areas in our life. At the same time, there's something called a command economy, which is industry is publicly owned, and the government makes decisions on the allocation of goods and services. So in a command economy, rather than individuals making these decisions on what to buy and purchase, it's the government that actually makes these decisions. The most notable example would be North Korea. North Korea, the government has a huge say in economic decisions. So there are very few economies in this day and age where the government is completely controlling the economy, but the idea that the government takes control, that's a command economy, whereas if the individuals make individual decisions, then that's more of a free market economy. The reality is that most economies are mixed. So specialization and trade are what makes a country prosper. And so most economies will have a bent towards a market economy with some elements of a command economy. And really, it really depends on where you're at. For example, a lot of the European countries might tend towards the side of a command economy as far as the government intervening in certain areas, whereas maybe an economy like Hong Kong will veer on the side of it being more of a market economy. So again, each country has a different degree in which the government is involved. So absolute advantage, what is absolute advantage? It's exactly how it sounds. So a country or individual is simply better than another country or individual in producing a particular product. So let's take a look at a country and use actual numbers here for this example here. So let's take a look at China and Mexico, an economy of toys and t-shirts. So China can either make 50 toys or 100 t-shirts, and Mexico can either make 25 toys or 60 t-shirts here. So the question here, given their production capabilities, is who has absolute advantage in toy production? Well, it's quite simple here. You take a look at these numbers here, and it's pretty clear cut here. So China can make 50 toys, and Mexico can make 25 toys. So if it's a matter of simply absolute advantage, then China has absolute advantage. Why? China, because, now again, there's no explanation here in this question, but it doesn't hurt to say that because 50 is greater than 25. You're just simply absolutely better. It actually makes sense, right? So China has absolute advantage in toy production. It's really easy. One example I give to students in my class, usually there might be a basketball player, and I ask, who has absolute advantage in playing basketball? Kobe Bryant or, the student in my class? And usually the student in the class will defer and say, Kobe Bryant is better. Having played what would amount to be maybe 20 unprecedented years with one team, Kobe Bryant would have absolute advantage, right? And that's an easy way of getting students to understand who has absolute advantage, just simply who's better, whether it's individually or as a country here. Now, the second question is, again, really simple here. 100 t-shirts versus 60 here. So who has absolute advantage in t-shirt production? Again, the no-brainer right here. China, because, once again, 100 is greater than 60. So I went over the explanations on why. Absolute advantage simply means because you're better, you can produce more. But the problem is the world doesn't work in a vacuum. We're dealing with opportunity cost. So the concept of opportunity cost is still going to be present pretty much in all these lectures. So when you choose to do something, you're giving up production of something else. So that's really the idea. So absolute advantage, it is good to know who has absolute advantage, who's better, but it doesn't really give you a whole lot of practical value. So comparative advantage is what we're looking for. We don't really care about who makes more, but what is the opportunity cost? And so comparative advantage is a country or individual that has a lower opportunity cost than another country or individual in producing a particular product. So remember, China can either make 500 toys or 100 t-shirts, whereas Mexico can make either 25 toys or 60 t-shirts here. Now, who has comparative advantage in toy production, and who has comparative advantage in t-shirt production? So explain why. So what you have to understand is comparative advantage takes into account what you are giving up. So back to the example I gave with a student that plays basketball. Let's go ahead and call that student Jeremy. So Jeremy plays basketball on the high school basketball team at Los Altos, and you have Kobe Bryant. So who has absolute advantage? Again, the student, Jeremy, would probably say, Kobe Bryant. But comparative advantage actually would probably be Jeremy, because if Jeremy is a student at Los Altos High School and he decides to play basketball, he's only giving up maybe his free time, maybe another sport, whereas Kobe Bryant would be giving up his NBA career, his reputation. He's giving up a whole lot more than Jeremy, the Los Altos High School student, would be in giving up, in choosing to play for the basketball team. So comparative advantage actually takes into account what you're giving up, not necessarily who's better, who's worse, but what are you giving up in terms of that equation here. So let's go ahead and work out this problem here. Let's look at China first here. So China can either make 50 toys or 100 t-shirts. So we go ahead and set that equal to each other because they're interchangeable here. So 50 toys will equal 100 t-shirts. Again, we're going to do some math here, but the good thing about economics is that the math here is not going to be difficult at all. It's going to be a lot of equalities and dividing and making sure that they're equal to each other. So if you're not the greatest at math, that's okay. Just you have to understand how to use the basic math in order to do this here. So when you ever see an equal sign, that really means opportunity cost. So the opportunity cost of making 50 toys is 100 t-shirts, but we don't care about 50 t-shirts or 50 toys or 100 t-shirts. We care about one toy here. So we want to divide by 50 here. So we get one toy equals 2 t-shirts, right? Now we also want to figure out what the opportunity cost is of one t-shirt. So let's go ahead, instead of dividing by 50 here, let's go ahead and divide by 100. And now what you get is one t-shirt equals 1.5 toys. Okay, so what you're seeing right here is one toy equals 2 t-shirts and one t-shirt equals 1.5 toys. So what you want to make sure to understand is that they are the reciprocal of each other. So one t-shirt equals 1.5 toys, one toy equals 2 t-shirts here. And we'll go ahead and use that shortcut here for Mexico. So Mexico here, on the other hand, Mexico can either make 25 toys or 60 t-shirts. So let's go ahead and divide here by 25 here to get what one toy would equal here. So one toy equals 60 over 25. So if you break that down, that's going to be 2 and 10 over 25, which is going to be equal to, let me see, 10 over 25 t-shirts. Now, if you break that down, that's going to be 40%, which is 2 over 5. So one toy equals 2 and 2 over 5, which is going to be equal to 12 over 5 t-shirts. So 2 and 2/5, which is 12 over 5 here. Now, we could divide by 60 right here to figure out what one t-shirt equals. But actually, an easier way of doing that would be find the reciprocal here. So one t-shirt is going to be the reciprocal of what this is here. So one t-shirt equals 5 over 12 toys. Now, in order to find who has comparative advantage in making toys, well, let's go ahead and take a look here. One toy equals 2 t-shirts, and one toy equals 12 over 5 t-shirts, or 2 and 2/5, right? So this is fairly close here. There's not a huge discrepancy, but China is going to have comparative advantage. China has comparative advantage in toys. Why? Because it has a lower opportunity cost. The reason why is that 2 is actually less than 2 and 2/5. So 2 is less than 2 and 2/5, in terms of what's being given up in terms of t-shirt production here. So China has comparative advantage in toys here. Now, we don't really even have to work out the other situation who has comparative advantage in t-shirts. We can just say, because China has comparative advantage in toys, Mexico has comparative advantage in t-shirts. Okay, why? Because you take a look at this, 5 over 12 is actually going to be less than 1/2 here. So 5 over 12 toys is less than 1.5 toys here. So again, comparative advantage is who's giving up less, whether it's in an athletic contest, whether it's in a production contest. Whoever's giving up less has comparative advantage, and that really determines why people do what they do. You can basically say that you're doing whatever it is, whether it's giving an economics lecture, whether it's studying for the economics test, is because you have a lower opportunity cost in doing that. So it doesn't necessarily have to apply with only international trade. It could do with individual behavior. We do things because we have a lower opportunity cost and therefore comparative advantage. So comparative advantage, let's go ahead and graph this and be able to see how that would actually look using production possibilities frontier. Let's merge these two concepts together here. So we're going to put toys here on the x-axis, and we're going to put t-shirts on the y-axis here. So let's say the Chinese can make either 50 toys. So let's put 50 right here. 50 toys or 100 t-shirts here. So it would be constant opportunity cost right here. So it would be, this would be China. And then Mexico could be either 25 toys. So let's go ahead and use red for, Mexico. So it'd be 25 toys. And either 60 t-shirts here, so 50, it'd be 60. So you can go ahead and do this here. Now, we're going to rework this out, and we're going to create a comparative advantage table so that when you're doing these things, you can actually see using a chart rather than just having a bunch of equations set together. So what we want to find out is what is the opportunity cost of one toy, and what is the opportunity cost of one t-shirt? And then this is for China, and this is for Mexico. Again, we worked it out prior to this here. So for China, 50 toys equals 100 t-shirts. And again, you want to divide by 50 here. So one toy equals 2 t-shirts here. So once you have this here, you want to fill out this chart so that you don't get confused. One toy for China would equal 2 t-shirts. And you want to make sure that you put in 2 t-shirts, because if you put in 2, you're not going to know what is actually being given up when you're making a toy. You might get confused with the labeling. So make sure you put in the label in there here. And the opportunity cost for one t-shirt, remember, is the reciprocal of 2, which is 1.5 toys here. So the opportunity cost here is 1.5, actually this is for China still, it would be 1.5 toys. Okay, so these two numbers are going to be reciprocals of each other. So if it's not, then you must have done something wrong here. So with Mexico, it's 25 toys equals 60 t-shirts. So you want to divide by 25 right here. 25. One toy equals, again, 2 and 2/5, which is going to be 12 over 5. 12 over 5 t-shirts. Okay, so we want to do it here. One toy equals 12 over 5 t-shirts. And one t-shirt is going to be the reciprocal, 5 over 12 toys here. So 5 over 12 toys. So when you're trying to figure out who has comparative advantage, well, 2 is going to be less than 12 over 5. And 5/12 is actually less 5/12 is going to be less than 1 over 2. So again, as we established before, China has comparative advantage in making toys because 2 is less than 12 over 5, and Mexico has comparative advantage in t-shirts. So again, China has comparative advantage in toys, and Mexico has a comparative advantage in t-shirts. Again, I reworked this problem out, but now I put it into a chart here. So in case the numbers, in case you kind of forget, just keep in mind the idea in economics is who has a lower opportunity cost. You're trying to do things to try to maximize the situation, and the optimal thing to do is to find the lower of the two opportunity costs. So example number 1, let's say Matt can make 10 baseballs or 5 gloves in 1 hour, while Andre can make 12 baseballs or 3 gloves in 1 hour. So determine who has comparative advantage in making baseballs and making gloves. Well, let's find the easy thing first here. Who has absolute advantage? So Matt can make 10 baseballs where Andre can make 12. So Andre has absolute advantage in making baseballs. Andre can make 3 gloves in 1 hour, and Matt can make 5 gloves in 1 hour. So who has absolute advantage in making gloves? Well, Matt. So this one's actually really easy. Matt has absolute advantage in making gloves, and Andre has absolute advantage in making baseballs. So you can already determine that Matt is going to make gloves and Andre is going to make baseballs. But again, the reason why isn't because of the absolute advantage, it's because of the comparative advantage. So let's go ahead and work out this equality. Matt, so 10 baseballs is going to equal 5 gloves. So what you have here is you divide by 10 on both sides, and you get 1 baseball equals 1.5 gloves. Again, find the reciprocal, which would be 1 glove equals 2 over 1, or just 2 baseballs. Okay. Now you want to go ahead and figure out for Andre, and you have 12 baseballs equals 3 gloves, and you want to divide by 12 here. So 1 baseball equals 1 over 4 gloves, and 1 glove equals 4 baseballs. Now again, you want to create this chart here. So the opportunity cost of 1 baseball, and you want to find the opportunity cost of 1 glove, and go ahead and put Matt and Andre right here. And you want to make sure you have a chart so that you can compare. So the opportunity cost for Matt here of making 1 baseball would be half of a glove. And for 1 glove, it's 2 baseballs. And in this scenario here, you have the opportunity cost for Andre of making 1 baseball is going to be 1/4 of a glove. And you're also going to have 4 baseballs right here. So again, we already established this here, but the lower of the two, it's actually easier to compare the whole number if there exists whole numbers rather than the fraction. Well, obviously, 2 baseballs is less than 4 baseballs, so Matt has comparative advantage in gloves, which we already established with absolute advantage. And Andre, 1/4 is less than 1/2, so Andre has comparative advantage in baseball. So Matt has comparative advantage in gloves, whereas Andre has comparative advantage in baseballs. So another example, let's say you have 2 individuals. Let's say you have Sarah and then you have Susan. So let's say Sarah can make 10 purses or 5 dresses in 1 hour, while Susan can make 15 purses or 15 dresses in an hour. Determine who has comparative advantage in making purses and in making dresses. Once again, let's find out who has absolute advantage right here. So Sarah can make 10 purses, while Susan can make 15. So clearly Susan has the absolute advantage in making purses. Why? Because 15 is greater than 10. And she can make 15 dresses, and Sarah can only make 5. So once again, Susan has absolute advantage. So Susan has absolute advantage in both. But the problem is here that you may have situations in which in a business partnership, one person is superior, but keep in mind, when Susan is making dresses, she's giving up making purses and vice versa. So Sarah's going to come in handy, and the rule of thumb here is one person can have absolute advantage in both, but one person cannot have comparative advantage in both situations. It's mathematically not going to be able to work out. So if Susan has comparative advantage in purses, then Sarah will have comparative advantage in dresses. And if Susan has comparative advantage in dresses, then Sarah will have comparative advantage in purses. So let's go ahead and again, work this out here so that you know exactly how to do this. So Sarah, again, 10 purses is going to equal 5 dresses. And you divide by 10. So make this really systematic. This part of the AP curriculum isn't going to be the most difficult, but it can get a little bit tedious. So if you practice this over and over again, then you'll get the hang of it here. So 1 purse is going to equal half, half of a dress, I guess. 1 purse equals half of a dress. Well, if you find the reciprocal of this, 1 dress will actually equal 2 purses. And you do the same thing for Susan here. Find the same equality here. And her situation is actually really easy here, because 5 purses equal, or 15 purses equal 15 dresses. So you have a 1-to-1 ratio here. So you don't really have to, you can divide here. You're dividing by 15 actually. So 1 purse equals 1 dress, and 1 dress equals 1 purse. It'd be silly to rewrite it, but let's go ahead and rewrite it. 1 dress equals 1 purse. So again, you set this equation up here. So the opportunity cost of 1 dress and the opportunity cost of 1 purse. And you have Sarah and you have Susan. And now you're just filling in the columns right here. So for Sarah, the opportunity cost of 1 purse is half of a dress, or half of a dress right here. And the opportunity cost of 1 dress for Sarah would equal 2 purses. Now, if you look at Susan, the opportunity cost of 1 dress would equal 1 purse, and the opportunity cost of 1 purse would equal 1 dress. So who has comparative advantage? Well, Sarah is giving up 2 purses to make 1 dress, where Susan's only giving up 1 purse right here. So this is lower. So Susan has comparative advantage in making. Susan has comparative advantage in dresses, or making dresses, whereas Sarah has comparative advantage in making purses. Why? Because 1/2 of a dress is less than 1 dress. So Sarah has comparative advantage in purses. I mean, you could, if you weren't able to remember how to work out this equality, one way you can actually do this is that, okay, Sarah can make 10 purses and she can make 5 dresses, whereas Susan, she's kind of indifferent. She's making, 1 purse or 1 dress. But you know what? Sarah is relatively better at making purses than dresses. So Sarah would have comparative advantage in purses, and Susan would have comparative advantage in dresses. And that's exactly what we get right here. So if you are a little bit confused with how to do this here, then sometimes you can use the numbers that are given to figure out who has comparative advantage using some logic. So another example would be below is the production possibilities frontier for country A. So let's say you have country A and country B. Who has comparative advantage in steak and in chicken? So let's say that you have country A. Let's go ahead and use different names for these countries here. Let's a country that starts with an A, Australia. So let's say country A is Australia. You can spell it correctly here. And country B, let's say it's Belgium. Okay, so who has comparative advantage in steak and chicken? Well, if you see here, there's no numbers here. So it's going to be a little bit, well, how can I actually do this here? You can't set them equal to each other. And it's a little bit problematic here. So I want you to be able to actually tackle this problem without actually being able to set the equalities to each other. Use a little common sense here and see who has a higher opportunity cost. Use your knowledge of production possibilities frontier. Well, right here, the steeper the curve, okay, so what you have is here, the steeper the curve, the greater the opportunity cost. So clearly in Australia right here, the curve here is steeper than it is in Belgium, which is a relatively flatter opportunity cost. So steak, in order to produce more steak, there's a lot of chicken that is actually being given up in order to produce steak in Australia, whereas in Belgium, it appears that much more steak can be produced. So the opportunity cost of making steak is actually less than in Australia. So based on this here, Belgium has comparative advantage in steak, and Australia has comparative advantage in chicken. And again, the way I saw this here is that there's a greater opportunity cost. So the production possibilities frontier here is much steeper. So the opportunity cost is higher in country A than it is country B. So the country that has a flatter slope will have comparative advantage in the x-axis good. So conversely, the steeper slope is going to have comparative advantage in the y-axis. So country A or Australia has comparative advantage in chicken, and country B or Belgium has comparative advantage in steak. So that's one way to figure out comparative advantage without even doing the math here. So if you're more graphically oriented, then you might be able to use this trick, particularly on a multiple choice question where you might not have enough time to work this out. Obviously, if you have time to work it out mathematically, then this method is not required. But this is a shortcut that can be used, again, if you know exactly if the curve is to scale, or if you know that numbers-wise that they produce the same amount of chicken, then you can actually draw it and figure out for yourself who has comparative advantage. On certain questions where you can't visually see it, then the best alternative might be to actually work it out. Another example is the production possibilities for Daniel and David, who has comparative advantage in pizza and bobblehead. So David and Daniel, they're both trying to figure out what to make in terms of pizza or bobbleheads here. Now, Daniel here can make either, let's take a look here. So Daniel can make either 30 pizzas or 100 bobbleheads, whereas David can make 50 or 400. Okay, well, this one's a little bit harder to visualize here. This is maybe not, I mean, I attempted to make this to scale, but you can kind of see that this one's a little bit steeper. So Daniel would have, or David has the flatter of the two slopes. So David has comparative advantage in making bobbleheads, and Daniel would have comparative advantage in making pizza. But again, we're not quite sure because it's not as apparent as the previous example. So let's go ahead and work it out here. Let's see if this, my trick to see which one has comparative advantage actually works out when you work it out mathematically. So let's take a look at Daniel right here. So Daniel's situation is 30 pizza equals 100 bobbles. In this case, it's the legendary Vin Scully bobblehead here. So divided by 30, so you have one pizza equals 100 over 30 bobbleheads. So that would be 10 over 3 bobbles, which is a shortened way of saying bobbleheads here. And one bobble equals the reciprocal of this, equals 3 over 10 pizzas. Okay. Now let's go ahead and see from the perspective of David. So David here, Now 50 pizza for him equals 400 baubles. And if you want to find the opportunity cost of one pizza, you divide by 50, and you get one pizza equals, this would be actually 8 baubles. 8 over 1. And let's go ahead and use a different color here. One bobblehead would equal 1 over 8 baubles, or 1 over 8 pizza, sorry. So let's go ahead and draw a chart here. So the opportunity cost of one pizza and the opportunity cost of one bauble, and the two individuals is Daniel and David. So again, the chart is good to organize information so that you're comparing rather than looking at a jumbled mass. So for organizational purposes, I highly recommend that you draw an opportunity cost chart so that you're able to organize the information and then make the decision from there here. So one pizza equals 10/3 of a bauble for Daniel. So 10 over 3 bauble. And one bauble equals 3 over 10 pizza for Daniel. So one bauble equals 3 over 10 pizza. Okay. Now for David, one pizza equals 8 baubles. And one bauble is equals 1 over 8 pizza here. Now again, it's easier to, when you're dealing with fractions, it might be a little bit harder. I think this is fairly apparent here. But David's opportunity cost of making pizza is 8 baubles, whereas Daniel, it's only 10 over 3. So Daniel has comparative advantage, just like it was predicted here. Daniel has comparative advantage in making pizza. So Daniel has comparative advantage in making pizza. Okay, so Daniel is going to be the one making this nice pepperoni pizza right here. And 1 over 8 is less than, 1 over 8 pizzas is less than 3 over 10. So when David is making a bobblehead, he's giving up production of 1/8 of a pizza, whereas Daniel is giving up 3/10 of a pizza. So clearly David is more suited to make the bobbleheads. So he's only giving up 1/8 of a pizza here. So David here has comparative advantage in making baubles. So Daniel should really focus here on the pizza aspect of the business, whereas David here is the more valuable component in making these Vin Scully bobbleheads. So again, let's take a look at another example. This time, let's look at 2 different countries. Let's say you have Korea and China here. So comparative advantage, let's say that in terms of making steel, Korea can make 15 and China can make 10, whereas in copper, Korea can make 60 and China can make 60. Refer to the table above to answer the following questions. These 2 countries are producing steel and copper using equal amounts of resources. What is the opportunity cost of producing steel for each country? What is the opportunity cost of producing copper for each country? And which country has comparative advantage in steel and copper? So again, this is exactly the same thing here, but now instead of dealing with 2 individuals, now we're dealing with 2 different countries. So let's create some more space to work out this particular problem here. But let's go ahead and cheat first here. So without doing any of the math, you see that Korea and China both make 60. So they can both make 60 here. So they are basically equal in making copper. But guess what? Korea is relatively better because they can make 15 units and China can make 10. So we can really stop right there and say, so blank has comparative advantage in making steel, and blank has comparative advantage in making copper. Now again, I just stopped right there because since they're equal at making copper and China or Korea is relatively better at making steel, again, my prediction here is that Korea is going to have comparative advantage in making steel. So Korea has comparative advantage in making steel, whereas China has comparative advantage in making copper. Now let's see if once we work out the problem, if this is what we get. Again, it's a nice shortcut if you have two countries making the same exact, then you can kind of deduce which country has comparative advantage without doing all of the work. But again, chances are if this is an FRQ problem, you're going to have plenty of time to work it out. So why not double check and make sure that you're right here. So let's take a look here. In Korea, 15 steel, units of steel, is going to equal 60 units of copper. Now let's go ahead and divide here by 15 here. So you get 1 steel equals 4 copper. And therefore the reciprocal, 1 copper, equals 1 over 4 steel. And take a look at China here. This here is 10 steel equals 60 copper. And divide by 10, and you get 1 steel equals 6 copper. And find the reciprocal here, so 1 copper equals 1 over 6 steel. So let's go ahead and draw this chart out to make sure that you understand. So here's the opportunity cost of 1 steel and the opportunity cost of 1 copper. And the two individuals here are, or the two countries here are Korea and China. So let's see this played out here in a chart. Yeah, we have all the information. Now it's just putting it into the chart to figure out if what we have is actually correct here. So in Korea, the opportunity cost of 1 steel would be 4 copper. And the opportunity cost of 1 copper equals 1/4 of a steel. So we have the information now for Korea. Now you look for China here. 1 steel equals 6 copper. And 1 copper equals 1 over 6 steel here. Again, make sure, again, this might seem like a small thing, but if you don't have the labeling, you're going to get confused and you're not going to be able to make sense of what the point is in doing these math equations. Again, the point of doing this really isn't about the math. It's to organize and understand where the opportunity costs are. So the opportunity cost is 4 copper to make 1 steel in Korea and 6 copper. So 4 is less than 6. So if the predictions I made were true, then Korea should have comparative advantage in making steel. And lo and behold, it checks out. 4 is less than 6. Korea's comparative advantage in making steel. And therefore, China, 1 over 6, is less than 1 over 4. So China has comparative advantage in making copper. So in terms of trade, Korea is going to trade in what has comparative advantage. So Korea is going to make steel and it will export steel. Whereas China has comparative advantage in copper and China will export copper and import steel. And conversely, obviously, Korea is going to export steel but import copper. So this is a fairly extensive problem when you're going to deal with specialization, trade. It could be production possibilities frontier with constant opportunity costs and comparative advantage. Finally, we're going to look at a problem using a multiple choice. And again, we're going to use that technique. How are we going to use our knowledge of production possibilities frontier and comparative advantage to tackle a problem on the AP exam? Now again, keep in mind that the AP exam, 67%, 2/3 of the exam is actually weighted on the multiple choice exam. So it's great if you know how to draw the graphs and the FRQs, but if you're not able to analyze a multiple choice problem, then chances are you're not going to get that 5 on the AP exam. So let's take a look at this example here. In India, a car can be produced by 8 workers in 1 day and a computer by 3 workers in 1 day. In the US, a car can be produced by 8 workers in 1 day and a computer by 2 workers in 1 day. Which of the following statements is false here, not in false? Which of the following statements here is going to be false? All right, so one of the things that you want to do is you want to try to figure out, are there any shortcuts? I mean, you can actually find this equality, but you probably don't want to spend more than maybe a minute or two on this problem. So This one's kind of tricky because you're going to find 4 true statements and you got to find the false one here. So neither country has absolute advantage in making computers. Well, let's go ahead and kind of see if we have any shortcuts here. So in 8 workers is used to make a car, or 3 workers is used to make a computer. And in the US, 8 workers are used to make a computer. And 2 workers are used to or 8 workers are used to make a car, I'm sorry, and 2 workers are used to make a computer. So what you see here is that in India, a car requires 8 workers, and in the US, a car also uses 8 workers. So they're equal. So the production is equal, and assuming the quality is the same, then you have a tie here. So what's interesting is that in India, a computer requires 3 workers, whereas in the United States, it only requires 2 workers. So right there, you stop right there. US has a comparative advantage, in making computers. You just stop right there because they're equal at making cars, and the US is relatively better at making computers. You just stop right there and you figure that out here. If the US has comparative advantage in computers, then what goes to reason is that India has a comparative advantage in cars. Okay, so neither, so let's find the 4 true statements and find the false one here. So neither country has absolute advantage in making computers. Let's take a look at that. Neither country has absolute advantage in making computers. So one computer, a car can be produced by 8 workers, and a computer can be produced by 3 workers here. 8 workers for a car, and a computer by 2 workers right here. This is actually false. So we can already figure out that this is actually false here. The US has absolute advantage in making cars. Is that a true statement here? Well, neither has. So this is also, the US has absolute advantage in making cars. That's false. The US has comparative advantage in making cars. No, the US has comparative advantage in making computers and not cars. So this is also false. The US has comparative advantage in making computers. That is absolutely true. And India has comparative advantage in making cars. That is also true. India has comparative advantage in making cars. Okay, that is also true here. All right. So actually this example, which of the following statements is false here? What you have here is that this here is the false statement. This here is the false statement. This here is the false statement, but these are true statements here. So again, you're not going to see a question like this on the AP exam because you're going to have multiple choice where it's A, B, C, D, or E. But in this case, you have 3 false statements and you have 2 true statements. Thank you for watching Educator.com.